So, Jason, I shut off the recording.
Recording in progress.
I'd like to call to order the April 28th Addison School District School Board meeting. The current time is 6 o'clock. At this time, I'd like to go around the room and do introductions of board members, administrators, and staff. And Jason, if you could start us, that would be awesome.
Jason Chance.
Trisha Allen.
Jess Venable Novak.
Mary Heather Noble.
Ellie Ross.
Steve Cash.
Steve Orzek.
Ron Macliffe.
Barb Wilson.
Ellen Whelan Weist.
David McCallum.
Suzanne Buck.
Wendy Baker.
You're good.
Courtney Cron.
Okay. I apologize for starting a little bit late, but the food didn't get here until 5:45, so we decided that we would wait, and it gave Wendy a little time to get here as well. At this time, I'd like a motion to adopt the agenda.
I'll move to adopt the agenda as printed.
Thank you. A second? Thank you. Any comments, changes? If not, all those in favor of adopting the agenda, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the agenda has been adopted. Moving next is our first public comment period. I believe we have no, at least when I looked before, there was no one online. And no one in the room would like to, okay. Thank you. Next up is the recommendation to approve the minutes of April 14th. A second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any comments, corrections? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving the minutes of April 14th, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? And Ellie abstained. Thank you, Ellie. Next, we have approval of the ACSD bills. Jason?
There were two warrants warned today. There was a payroll warrant for $1.29 million. And there was a general warrant dated April, payroll warrant was dated April 18th. General warrant dated April 25th. I reviewed the bill this morning. Suzanne reviewed
I did
as
them.
well. I had no questions or issues, so I move that we approve the bills as reviewed.
Okay.
Second.
Excellent. Any questions? All those in favor of approving the bills as reported by Jason, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The bills have been approved. Moving right here, next up is report of the superintendent. And I'll let you use my sheet.
Okay. So we have some personnel appointments and resignations. Just trying to read down here and see
There's one on this page too.
yeah, what it is that we have. I think there's nothing on here that is particularly of note. We're hiring some fine people, which is great. You'll see Jonathan Vandermatt, which is that is a health teacher. That's a new position that was part of the strategic plan, and he will be joining the MUH staff and also helping to facilitate some health curriculum development work that is across the district. So he's going to be wonderful, I think. So that's really helpful. So I'll leave those for you to go ahead and approve as written.
You want me to move?
Yeah.
I move that we accept the appointment of Tyler LaFierre, wellness teacher, Emily Roberts, school nutrition assistant, Jonathan Vandermatt, health teacher, and then accept the resignation of Michael Conley and the resignation of Joseph Henley.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Any questions? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor of accepting the appointments and resignations as read by Suzanne and in the agenda, please indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, Steve, thank you. Next,
So the other thing I have for you is just a little bit of an update as to the grade configuration conversations in Bridport and Shoreham. I just came from the Shoreham meeting, as a matter of fact, and as well as a meeting with the staff from both schools. And I meet with the Bridport parents one last time in the morning, and then at the select board meeting in Bridport tomorrow night. That meeting is open to the public. So, any of you who wish to join in are welcome. As you might remember from before vacation, these conversations are related to two things. One is declining enrollment and therefore smaller staffing configurations at both Bridport and Shoreham Elementary Schools. They're both scheduled to have K1, 2, 3, and 4, 5s, combined grades. And also, we took a look through Courtney's presentation around just academic proficiency, and we're working hard to figure out a delivery approach that's going to help the highest number of kids make more than a year's worth of growth. And so we're working together to do that, and we have had a process that has taken the whole central office team to put together, and I think it's really informed parents in both communities well. I was meeting with the Shoreham parents to sort of say, here's what I'm hearing as where we are after about 80 parents have participated in a survey, final survey, to determine whether or not a K1, 2, and a 3, 4, 5 option would be preferred versus the two K1, 2, 3, 4, 5s. And my assumptions felt true to them, which feels good. So I'll be doing that again in the morning with Bridport, and then I should have a report to send to you probably Wednesday morning, and then it will be a public document once I send it to you. And it'll take you a little while to read, so I'm also gonna send it to the families of both communities and the staff, since it can be accessed anyway. And which means John Flowers will have it, which probably means there'll be an article in the Addy and that just kind of picks up pieces of it. It's been a very good process, not always easy, but I think one where lots of people are coming together for the good of kids, which is always what makes this work well worth it, so. That's my
awesome.
update.
Yeah, any questions for Dr. Baker? I think one thing that you had highlighted to me today was the high response rate which I thought was pretty awesome. So
Yeah, it's evenly dispersed among the two communities, and probably about 75% of the families in each community have participated.
which is, I
Yeah,
think,
on the survey.
that's
which,
tremendous.
We've had many conversations even since the time I've been here about how hard it is to try to have community engagement methods that everybody can access, but it does feel as though there's a single voice emerging that feels important. So part of the meetings last night and tomorrow morning are to double check that and see what that feels like. The staff also were asked to give their thoughts in a separate survey that was just for them, and about 3/4 of them had done so prior to my meeting with them at 3:00 today, and so it feels like we have a sense of where we are, and a way, I think a way to move forward that feels like it's bringing people together, which is good.
So I would like to thank you for, it's not been an easy process, and definitely kind of started with some bumps in the road,
Yes.
I have to say.
Yes.
And I really do appreciate your perseverance and, calmness, and just being able to work with the communities, and I think it's gonna make, obviously your decision will be made, but I think it's gonna make a big difference in how people feel and
Yep,
in the long run, so thank you so much.
you're welcome.
Okay, Well, with that said, we'll get on to our next agenda item, which is where we're going to spend the bulk of the evening, which is on goal setting. And one thing that I wanted to mention that it's possible to do is if someone is interested in making a motion to suspend the rules so that we're less formal during this dialogue, we can. Otherwise, we'll continue to do it like we would normally during a board meeting. It's really up to you guys if you want to do that, and it takes 2/3 of a vote to do that. So that it's, obviously we still have to be, thoughtful of each other and making sure that everyone has an opportunity to speak. But if you would like a little less formality, I would be, because I know that's kind of come up in the past, whatever. You can always make a motion, and we'll see if the majority would like to do that, or 2/3 would like to do that. Okay, Ellie.
I move to suspend the rules during this discussion to have a little less formality.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Excellent. Any discussion around that, or Steve?
Even if we're going to suspend the rules, I would hope that the chair could continue to maintain balance in those discussions. Because
Absolutely.
without formal rules, some people tend to dominate the discussion, and I would hope that would not happen.
Right. And what I'm thinking is, in this case, we can kind of talk, you don't have to direct everything at me, like during normal formal Robert's rules, it's like you're really supposed to address to the chair. And so we can really just have a dialogue. But I absolutely agree, Steve, that, to really make sure, and that's why I said what I did, that we need to, really make sure everyone has an opportunity to participate and speak and not have individuals kind of take over the conversation. Ellie?
And so is it fair to say that you might continue to facilitate the meeting?
Yes,
even
oh,
though the
totally,
rules
yeah,
wouldn't?
yeah, I won't just leave or that kind of thing. So, any other discussion around that? And again, it takes 2/3, so today we have 12. So someone do the math for me.
8.
8, okay. Should we take a vote? Are we ready? Okay, all those in favor of suspending the rules during this particular discussion indicate by, why don't we do a show of hands? I think that might be easier to count. All those in favor, just raise your hand. Okay, and anyone opposed? And I think that was everyone, so there's no abstentions. Okay, excellent. So we'll give it a try, like if we find out later in the future that, this doesn't work as well, when we're having this kind of a dialogue, we can always go back to the old way of doing it. On Saturday morning, in preparation for the meeting, I thought I would just, send out an email to kind of frame what we'll be doing here today. I'm not going to read through the entire email, but, the first thing is really taking a look at, what we did last year and make sure we're, at the same place. And what I am going to do is share my screen. That's why I'm up there. And I have a little slide deck. So give me 2 seconds here. I tested this before. Maybe. Yeah. And let me do it in slideshow. And the first part is just kind of there as a guiding light. I pulled in a couple quotes from the Governance Core book that we've used in the past, which really gives a definition, just to remind us of what governance is, and it's really the what as opposed to the how, just as kind of a reminder as we're embarking on the discussion, because as we're going into goal setting, a lot of, what we decide very much could have impact on the how, which is then something that Dr. Baker and her team would need to then do in order for us to meet that goal. And so that's why this is really a collaborative process between her team, as well as the board, as we're embarking on this. Next. So, as everyone knows, the DQS governance standards come into play, they're in effect as of July 1st, 2025. And it is broken down into 3 areas. This is just a reminder. And the good news is I could give tests out to Jess and Steve and Ron, because we actually went through this a week ago Monday. Is governance priorities, governance protocols, and governance process. In your board pack, I did provide you a link to the DQS webinar that the Vermont School Board Association provided us, and materials, as well as a link to the document. But in today's discussion, I don't plan to dive deep in those documents. I'm assuming that we are already there. And this slide just gives a definition, pulling it from the book or from the actual rules themselves, what each of those governance priorities and protocols and process is. Okay. So then, just to recap what we've done, because we knew that these rules were going to be in place as of July. Last year, the board did a self-evaluation, and we didn't have the rubrics or anything like that at that point in time. That's still coming. But just whether or not, based on the rule itself, whether or not we thought that we were actually doing it, or we basically are kind of doing it partially, or we're not really doing it at all, kind of thing. And we went through each one of those. And then what we did, based on that survey, we rolled up kind of the results. I presented it at the board meeting, and then the board decided that, you know what, instead of just looking at it from the perspective of what we were doing so just by itself, well or not, let's also look at kind of importance as well, right? So as a result, board members then gave me their top 5 rule priorities for last year in order, so that we could then put another lens, a filter on those rules. And so we did that. And on June 1st, which happened to be Wendy's first meeting with us, and we had a retreat, we actually selected Rule 11332, that the board ensures its annual budget aligns with its stated priorities and provides an equitable distribution of resources to help meet the needs and goals of every student. And as a result of this is actually a really good example where, this is a very much, we selected the rule, but the vast majority, if not all, other than us learning and going along and listening and trying to learn as much as we could, fell on the administrative side. And so, Matt, even at that meeting, gave us a presentation and at the time, and they went off to school, and training to learn more about equity-based budgeting was. And as a result, even though this was initiated in June, we actually had a budget that passed in early March that was an equity-based budget, which is, pretty awesome. But this was a really pretty heavy lift, and was a really great goal to start with, I think, looking back at it. So then, And that's basically, what the rest of this side says. So now, what our task is to look at the rules that are remaining that we prioritized high, right? To identify if there's another rule that we want to actually select that we would actually create goals around, right? And so that's really the first part of the meeting today. In addition, to start to think about other goals, because one of the things that we haven't done, that as a reminder, when we did the evaluation of the superintendent, we need to identify for this year 3-4 goals for Dr. Baker as well. So she knows our expectations for the coming year. And it's really important to start with us first, because we may have a goal that in turn then is going to be a goal for her as well, in order for us to implement it. Everybody? Yes?
So, did I hear you say that we would choose 3 to 4 goals, which would then be Dr. Baker's goals?
No.
Okay,
I
it sounded
said-
like you said
no.
that, so
I
please
said,
help me.
one of the things that we need to do is collaboratively with Dr. Baker, ultimately, is identify 3 goals to 4. Last year, I think we had 4. That would be part of her performance review this
Okay.
coming year. And the reason that we're starting with us first is because our goals can definitely become her goals as well. So that's why we have to start with us first, right?
Well, it just sounded a little different, so I just wanted to clarify,
No,
that's all.
nope, sorry if I didn't explain that well. So, next, this is, other than being color-coded a little different, should be familiar, and if you click on the document, it does take you to the spreadsheet. This is the summary that we put together based on everyone, and there were 10 responses, providing their first through 5th choice. And it's in this particular table, summarized in this table. The only thing that's a little different than last year is I realized that it should have been a weighted average because a first choice versus a 5th choice weighs different, right? And so now we have weighted averages. So the item in green is the one that we selected last year. And the ones that we had prioritized, you can see the last one on the list is the weighted average is 0.5, so it drops off pretty quickly. So we have several, that are still rated fairly high that we can take a look at to see if in fact we want to, select one of those. I have highlighted the one in yellow, and the main reason was when we had our executive committee, it was like, oh my, this parallels with the committee that we've formed. And it could very well be, the committee is really what's really needed at this point, because that committee has to get started and they will, be really driving that, right? So it wouldn't necessarily have to be the goal that we select now, unless it's something that, folks feel that we should. So, what I'd like to do is just open it up and see if folks have ideas, for, on this list, what would be an impactful goal or rule to select. Like we did before, we selected something that was going to be impactful, right? And just because we don't select something doesn't mean that we're not doing work towards it. Like you can look on the full list, and like, for example, if you look at the second one from the bottom, this year we've done quite a bit on the legislative front, right? And so most likely the next time that we would do a self-evaluation some of these would change as far as what folks thought, as far as the amount of work that we're doing and how well we're doing, right? So I am gonna be quiet for a while and let folks talk and share what you're thinking. Steve?
So one thing that was brought up last year, and we said that we might address this later, is how do we evaluate ourselves against these goals? What are the objective measures as to whether we've met them or not?
Right.
As far as the budgeting goes, did we say we're going to set this goal and here's how we
Right.
measure it, and then next year, which is now,
Right.
how did we measure against
Right,
those
right.
those standards?
Right.
So some of these are a little harder to do that way.
Yes.
To set an objective measure and say
Right.
whether we've met it or not. So I would like people to keep that
Yeah.
in mind. If we are going to start doing that, set objective
Right, right.
goals that are measurable,
Right.
which is one of the smart things.
Yep,
That we keep that in mind as we select them, and
thank you.
that not only the goal has to be selected, but what are the criteria that we're going to
Right.
use to evaluate that.
Right, or we work together collectively to come,
Right,
yeah,
right.
figure that out, exactly. That's a very good point, Steve. And also, most likely, summerish, we'll probably have available the rubric, and so we'll know how the AOE is going to be evaluating us. And, the first one we do will be a benchmark that, they'll compare us against to see if we're really improving over time, that kind of thing. So I'm sure once we see the rubric, we'll also have better guidance around that as well. But your point is, selecting the rule isn't necessarily the goal, we have to turn it into a goal, is what I heard you say. Okay, anyone else?
I guess I'm a little bit at an advantage because I've seen
know.
the rubrics and I've worked with the AOE on them, and I know that they aren't just going to be using our self-assessment of how great we think ourselves are. They're also going to look at our student data to then turn around and say, well, this board thinks they're really great, but their student data really isn't following what they say they're doing. So there's other factors that are going to come into play. They aren't looking for boards to be proficient, at least not in the first year or two, because nobody could be proficient at all of this. And, I mean, you mentioned the budgeting, so the budgeting does have, tied into it is also student data, so to make sure that your budget actually has done what you said it was going to do and increase student performance. It's also looking at, some of these standards also want to make sure that your policies help drive those pieces. So, so it's not just saying, looking at the standard and saying, oh, it says we need to do this. Well, we did that, but there's other pieces underneath it that the AOE is also looking for.
Yep.
So,
Thank you, Suzanne. Yeah, and that's another reason, when I thought about the one I just highlighted in yellow, right? That is really linked to the first one, the one we did select, right? Because through that reporting that we'll be doing and working with admin on, we'll start to see evidence in the data, right? One way or another. And so, so there, it's governance. So, there's linkage between these in many cases. Ron?
It might be helpful to know, maybe from Courtney, when we should expect to get a trickle of data in about this year's data, student data, just to help us understand what we can effectively evaluate.
So our state assessment data, which our schools just finished administering, will come in last year, late July, August. They say this year, earlier. I don't know what that means. My guess is July, August.
Okay.
And that's just one set of data. The rest, our screener data, we'll have access to that spring data before school's out. And local assessment data, indicators on our standards from progress reports. We have every reporting period, so high school and the middle school quarterly, and the elementary schools twice a year.
Thanks.
Follow up to Courtney. Courtney, the state data, when it comes in, how long is that embargo period before we can actually see the data?
A long time. I think it was January that when they released the snapshot. However, I think we found some ways to share some of it, not publicly before, I know we did, before then.
Also, I think the state does not expect to have such a long embargo period because they were, if you remember right, the secretary was in the midst of the Listen and Learn tour, so I think the expectation is that that'll be a very short process this time.
Yep.
We hope.
Other discussion, thoughts, or even, questions about a rule, like you might see a rule here, like on community engagement or whatever, and have questions on it, and we can talk about it. Mary Heather.
Well, I have two questions. One is for Suzanne, and I think I know the answer, but I just want to check on this. I'm wondering if, just in your work with the SBA and the AOE on the rubric, have you gotten any indication that that the AOE sees priority rules, that there's rules that they sort of think should be addressed first by boards?
When they met with us, or we met with them, I don't know how you want to word it, a year ago, they felt all of the work was really important because all of the board's work ultimately leads to affecting student performance.
Come join.
Come join.
There's food too.
So, if I had to hedge my bet, I would say that probably anything that has to do with student performance is probably gonna roll up closer to the top. And others would trickle down, but realistically, everything we do touches students one way or another, but the biggest piece is of looking at how your students are performing over time, because nothing happens overnight.
Right.
So over time, and then, looking at how you're spending your resources. Like, are your students lacking in math and the math scores are going down, but you're spending everything in, reading, so then something's out of whack.
Right.
So,
And I guess the other, I'll call it just an observation. It seems like we probably have a good sense of the things that are on the top of our, that are currently on our plates, things that need to be done. So obviously, we as a board have prioritized just through our strategic plan, the student performance stuff. So, and I think, this is why in the executive committee meeting we were talking about maybe we should highlight this one because it kind of coincides with the work that we're already asking of the administration. But also we have, and I know Barb, you and Wendy have talked about this, we have policy work to do, really important policy work that involves having to have important conversations with our communities. And related to that is our facilities stuff and our facilities decision making, which also will require a lot of community engagement. So it seems to me like just from an observation standpoint, like any rules addressing student outcomes and or community engagement and or facilities might kind of rise to the top just because we already know that's on our plate. We've already kind of acknowledged like this is stuff we have to do. And we have committees that are already like actively working on this stuff that maybe, just kind of logically those would be the things to consider. Recognizing that, the other thing that I'm thinking of is the student achievement stuff. it's gonna take some time to see
Yeah.
some results from efforts, so I'm also just wondering about the timeliness of that.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you, Mary Heather.
yeah.
Others? Ellie?
Looking at the last one on the list here, at least annually, the board formally evaluates the performance of the superintendent based in part on the superintendent's progress towards meeting agreed upon goals. I feel like that's one we've already kind of done a lot of work towards, and even if it's not the main thing we focus on, maybe we should add that to the list just so that we can, you know,
Right.
tackle it and get it
And that's
off the
kind of
list.
what we're doing
Like
here.
low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why I said, just because we don't, I kind of look at this, at least for me, what helps me when I look at this list is, there's a lot of these items as well as the ones that aren't on here, because there's additional ones that we thought we were doing work towards that didn't fall to the top of the list, right? We don't have to select it today as a rule that we're going to work on, if in fact we feel that we can make progress like we've been making, right? You know, this year, you know, we got a superintendent evaluation process in play. What's important, as I said before, what we haven't done is set goals for this coming year. But that is, you know, this is the beginning of it. We're selecting our goals, and then we really need to work with Dr. Baker and come up with, you know, based on our goals and based on other things that need to happen, what are we gonna agree to for the coming year, right? So that's important. So we don't have to say we're selecting that. I think, like, it's the ones that are really a heavy lift, are more of a heavy lift where we wanna put more focus in, like the one we selected last year. That really had to be selected as a rule, because we wouldn't have done it. I'm sure we wouldn't have done it, had done an equity-based budget, had we not done it. And of course, now we've done it, we're gonna continue to do it. And, you know, ask them questions, how effective is it? And that kind of thing. Is it really doing what we thought it would, that kind of thing, which then student academic data comes in and helps as well. So it's really, I think, you know, for this is identifying, you know, we really need to do some work here, and it's gonna be a heavier lift, right? It may need maybe a retreat centered around it, some training centered around it, so that we can then really define what the policy considerations, what other things what does it mean, the fact that we're working on this, what needs to change? As opposed to some of these, it's like, well, let's just do it, right? We don't have to define more around it. We just really need to make sure we're consistently doing it. Does that help? Does that make sense? Other thoughts? Suzanne?
So, thinking about what Steve started the conversation with around the need for objectives
Yep.
and measurable goals, but also knowing what you're going to collect that proves that you've done the work. Some of these would then mean, like if you were, I'll pick on community engagement because it, you know, what you do for one person that works for them doesn't necessarily work for their neighbor and vice versa. So if you're working to improve your communication and community engagement, how are you going to measure that? Like what type of data would you be collecting? Which then turns around to, well, how are we collecting that? You know, are we developing forms? Or are we doing surveys? Are we going door to door and asking questions? How are we gathering that, and how are we making sure that it's reliable data and that we can use it to say, yes, we've done 5 things and here's all of the information that we gathered, and we can say that it's made this for a difference. You know, it's great to pick off the big ones, but sometimes the big ones have a lot of work that people might not necessarily be thinking of, and trying to create all of that up front.
Yep. And, yeah, go ahead, Steve.
I think we heard an example of some data tonight with the conversations in Bridport and Shoreham and the surveys and how many people from those 2 towns responded to those. So To me, that's one example of data, and I do think that one can definitely be a hard one to get around, but data like that, to me, seems very valid.
And it's like, and it may be something that it, you know, it takes us several years, you know, to really get to where we wanna be, right? And if we took something on like that, just because we select one doesn't mean that, you know, it won't be quite like the equity-based budget where we turn it around the dime, just like that.
Matt, right, just like that?
You know?
Matt has his little magician stick.
Yeah, exactly, and it's, you know, that one was just, you know, when you think about what we did was amazing and was a lot to really even expect, right? But I think it was a willingness that everyone agreed this is really something we needed to do, right? But, you know, so we don't have to think that, oh my gosh, we'll never be able to finish that in the next year. We can really then select something that where we maybe have a board retreat around it, we, you know, basically put some thought around it, and we start chipping away at doing it better. Steve?
So would it be out of line to suggest that maybe we narrow this?
Yes.
What I'm seeing here is that we continue to do the budget one, so that, you know, we're continuing to be committed to that. That the new one that we're taking on was about monitoring student academic progress and wellness, and one that we still need to watch, but we're well on the way to having that one done. As Ellie pointed out, was the evaluating the superintendent. So that sounds like three reasonable, you know, one's new, one is still work in progress, and one we have a lot of it done. Those would be the three that I would suggest, but.
Okay, that's great. Go ahead, Ellen.
I think we should include the community engagement one as well. Seems like there is going to be a lot of need and opportunity to have lots of conversations with the community. I think Wendy has demonstrated a really effective way that she is doing that. So the board should probably develop our own intentional process and mentality around including community in our conversations and our decision making.
And Ellen, I just want to clarify, you're talking about 113.2.3 or 113.1.1?
Oh, great question, Ron.
So the one that I think you're talking about is the board annually evaluates the effectiveness of community engagement and public communication efforts, which is, as you said, just kind of community engagement. And the other one, which, I mean,
I'm talking about 113.1.1.
yeah, I was thinking about that one too, actually.
That's
which
actually
is a
the
little
one
bit
that,
different.
that grabbed my eye. I think
Yeah.
monitoring what we don't necessarily do very well
Yeah,
feels a little less important.
yeah.
Okay, Ellie, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was kind of along those same lines, looking at those two and then looking at the two directly below the green one. It does seem like each of those have a goal that we need to do first before we can then
Right.
do the evaluation part. So it doesn't make sense to do, even though it's rated higher, the reviews whether how our actions have impacted the school system when we haven't set our measurable goals yet.
And that's kind of what we're starting on now,
Right.
right? And so I'm not sure, and I could be wrong, like to achieve like 11312, that's kind of an example of one of those where I mentioned, well, we may not have to put a lot of process around it. It's not like turning something around and developing something new. It's like we need to do it, right? And make sure that as an executive committee, driving that process and having time for the board to do that, right? And so that, and which is why we're here today. So I could be wrong, but I'm thinking that wouldn't have to be one that we select. It's one that we will make progress towards. And my guess is, had we just reevaluated ourselves, that one might not have been as high this time because we did set goals last, and after Dr. Baker came, right? And so you have to think about where we were when we did this. We hadn't had a superintendent we had an interim for a year, right? And so there was no demonstration that we had done that though it had been done in the past, right? So we were kind of a unique point in time, which caused some of these things to be evaluated a little differently, I think, than they would have normally.
So I think maybe we're all a little confused then, because I've heard multiple people like point out those ones that seem like that easier, low-hanging fruit ones that we could check off, and you're saying, well, we don't even need to select them, but maybe I'm hearing that we do want to select them and say, okay, yes, we're going to make sure that this kind of gets finished so that it
I
can
mean, that's
be
valid, that's
checked off
valid.
and
Yeah, that's valid.
highlighted the next time we put it up here is done,
Right.
or whatever.
And that's valid,
Um,
and that's valid.
And then still select one that's like the bigger project.
Right. I mean, that's valid.
Others?
When I look at was it 1.1? To me, that almost leans towards like the strategic planning stuff. Like, isn't that
Which
Well,
one,
you-
I'm sorry?
1.1?
The
The
community.
community engagement and the vision and goals of the.
Incorporate community and put it into the vision and goals for the school system.
Yeah, and it does seem, it seems like that would be a better fit when we're looking at starting the strategic plan.
Well, but I mean, people interpreting that like this should be like anytime we do anything, like we that as a goal or some sort of vision, like capital improvement planning or.
Of a certain nature, yeah.
Yeah.
The word incorporate to me kind of brings more depth to that and is really like going beyond that visioning and that thinking and then putting it actually into motion and bringing some of that input into a process. So that I do agree, for the most part, just that word incorporate is really like kind of that next level.
You could collect a bunch of stuff and incorporate nothing.
Exactly.
Right. Right.
I mean, the community engagement stuff, yeah, as you said, that's hard to measure. Would it be better to wait and see what the rubric, what the rubric coming out is, do they have anything specific in there that we might be able to get a handle on at least? I mean, these are great goals, they seem a little vague to me around specifics, and I would like to see what the state is gonna hold, what kind of standard the state is gonna hold us to on those two in particular, and 3.5, how are they gonna hold us to that? I mean, how is the state gonna evaluate whether we are apprised of proposed legislation and policy making that may affect its school system and students?
True.
Here's a quiz.
Well, yeah, and who's gonna administer that quiz is gonna be the senator of the House or the governor, and so, those three, although they're good goals, I would, personally, I would defer to see what the state says. Here's the tools that we're gonna use to measure you against those. Whereas student data, I mean, my God, that's almost all we ever talk about, at the state level, at the board level, at the school level is there seems to be a little more firmness around that than there is about, are you engaged with your community? And I would like to see what the state considers that engagement to look like before we start working on that. And maybe when that rubric comes out, we can say, oh, well, this actually is doable. We could do that, but it still seems up in the air to me right now.
Mary Heather, go ahead.
I recognize that the difficulty in selecting something where you're not really sure, what, the endpoint that you're aiming toward. But I would argue that our goals and our standards for community engagement should be more focused on what our community is expecting, and not just what the state is expecting. And I would add advocate for elevating it just because we know we have to do it. We know we have to do it now. The urgency has really grown because we have to figure out our school attendance boundaries. We have to do our C30 work. We have to, put together a capital improvement plan and decide which of our buildings we're gonna invest in, and that kind of, those go hand in hand, and none of that decision-making can really be done without engaging with our community in earnest. And I guess the other reason I would kind of lean into elevating that one as well, is because it's a little too easy, I think, to just kind of say, well, the C&E committee will take care of that. I think this is a board-wide effort, and having been on the C&E committee, where you feel like you're doing the work and not everyone is doing the work, it can be really hard. And I think the degree to which we can elevate this as a full board endeavor, that would be good. And in terms of like measuring our effort with that, I think that may involve some survey work, some efforts to get feedback from the people we serve. And I just see that, I mean, I'm not suggesting that we don't elevate the student achievement stuff, because I'm sort of thinking of this, whatever we choose are gonna somehow translate into what Dr. Baker's goals are gonna be. And obviously, I don't wanna see the student achievement stuff disappear from that. But I do think as a board and as an administration, we have a lot of partnering with the community on some really tough conversations and tough decisions that I would advocate for having both of those really pretty high on our goals, however we word them, or I don't know. So, Ellen, go ahead.
I mean, I don't see any difficulty in measuring this. I think we would have to create and then follow an inclusive process.
Yeah.
And you either do or you don't do those
Yeah.
things. And if we trip all over the definitions of inclusive and, anything else, then I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot. I also think that this isn't necessarily a strategic plan, because I think even though it's using the terminology of vision and goals, there is a lot of vision and goals that's going to be, to Mary Heather's point, that's going to be happening around buildings and around residents and all kinds of things. So I think it's broader language maybe than just that one piece of it. Although it wouldn't hurt to continue to engage around how are we doing on the strategic plan with the community as well. But again, I don't think measuring this is difficult at all. You make a plan and then you follow it. Yes or no?
Jess.
Yeah, I agree, and along those lines, like I know part of it is identifying what training and education we need, and there's tons of great resources and education around how to measure community engagement, quantitative, qualitative. Like Emily Blistein probably knows a lot more than I do, but there's everything from like how many people view a school's newsletter to how many people take your survey and ways to loop back and accessibility best practices. So yeah, I think just because we don't know it right now in this moment doesn't mean that there's not best practices.
I'm also beginning to doubt if this phantom rubric even exists. I think if we try and wait for it.
Oh, it does.
we'll be waiting for years.
Well, I'm actually looking at part of it right now, which I can't distribute. Not to fuel further doubt, however,
You've seen it.
there will be contributor workshops, that will be scheduled, and I wouldn't be surprised, but there's some significant rewriting of the material that has already been drafted. I think the intent of the self-assessment tools, as I understand them from the secretary, is to put in place measurements of new districts they anticipate being in place, and the districts that are currently in place will begin to utilize them to ensure that the final process is solid and the AOE is ready to gear up. So I would say that the work that has been done might be used in part in that process, but I'm not sure at this point that it will actually have the bulk of the tool that we work with. So we're in a different era than we were a year ago.
That's true.
Yeah.
Others? Thoughts? Dr. Baker, do you have some thoughts about what, you observe us and you've been engaged with our community, with
Well,
anything?
I mean, I think the community engagement part is probably where the greatest growth exists. In the organization as a whole, it's I think as Ellen was saying, it's a mindset shift to engage the community when you don't have an answer in mind. When you are truly just trying to gather information and determine how can we work through something together, where are we, and what does that look like? And I have not yet found, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I have not yet found a community engagement policy that describes that mindset as something that the board values, both for the operations side to be engaging in, as well as on the governance side, whether that's in the facilities committee or a policy committee, or so there's no real roadmap right now to follow. And to the extent that you're appreciative of some of the things that we've done together, my doctoral dissertation was around community engagement, I know that there are a lot of practices that are really ripe for understanding and taking and being able to build through things together. I do worry that I think I said this at the CNE meeting, community engagement meeting, that I worry that the direction the state is going in, it will be harder for communities to engage with school districts because they'll be bigger. And one benefit of really taking that on well is in helping communities get ready for that process, maybe with different expectations, different structures in mind. And it also is something that touches all aspects of that work. So I think, that one is the one that we have the least common understanding about what we're talking about, really, and I don't have a sense from you about what you would expect from me about that. I have a sense of what I think needs to be done, but that's not really something that we've worked on together. And so that feels like something that would be helpful. As far as the academic piece, that is very much set in motion. Because you have the Student Outcomes Committee, you will be elevating the districts and the community's knowledge about academics and where we are right now. I think the community engagement part, also relates to students. That's something that I think that committee, for example, could be engaging with students about the outcomes they're feeling relative to their education, so it's really a mindset of how you go about the work, and what you make of it. So I'm not worried about the academics, that's gonna come along, we've done good work there, and that will be something that we'll be sharing probably as a point of pride in terms of progress moving forward. The community engagement feels pretty fragile, and I think it is beyond my capacity to be able to work with each committee alone to think that through while doing the other parts of the operational part. So if that's something that you could see your way toward making a priority around, I think it would bear fruit.
Others, thoughts? Ellie?
I have a question about this discussion and next steps. At some point here, do we make a motion to choose one of these? Is that where this is going, or?
Yeah, or at least, I don't know if we have to do a formal vote, but we could do it that way. It definitely works. I'm trying to remember last June how we did it, in the retreat, if we did a, formal vote, it may have been. And we could definitely do this. And, I noticed that Laura did join us and would like to give her an opportunity to speak. I didn't realize she was, on. I did move her over as a panelist. Laura, did you have any questions
I was a
or
little
comments?
late, I apologize. I just wanted to reiterate my support for really engaging in community engagement this year. I think it's something that our community has basically screamed for quite a while, and I think we really owe it to them and to ourselves to lean into that this year. So.
And sorry if I didn't notice you until just a little bit ago.
It's good.
An example of a tangible product that could come from that, we have a kind of a future study relative to the Ripton Elementary School and what that looks like. So right now, there is no guiding policy that would suggest how something like that involves a community so deeply is undertaken. So, we may find our way through that. We may even find our way through that really well, but that's an example of something on the operations side that we could use some policy guidance around that will help us to help everyone know how to go about things. Matt, who's leading the capital improvement, project from the operations side, he can look at that policy and say, okay, let me think about devising something that brings us to the next step. Or Courtney, as she's thinking about, the academic results and what does that look like, and what is our reporting process? How do we go about that? What do we even, who do we involve, and how do we pull that together? I think and of course, the director of, equity, inclusion, and restorative practice, this work is getting underway, and no one right now has any guidance about that except mine, which they will get sick of hearing eventually. So, something that's a little bit more codified, I think it will be used well by a number of really smart, talented people.
Suzanne.
I was gonna say the other piece that I think will come into play into some of that work is also what comes out of Montpelier this spring. Or the last thing that I heard was it might not come out until June, because I guess it's going to come in the budget committee over the Memorial Day weekend. But, so, understanding that piece as we do the communications with people to help them understand the 20 pages that I printed out this afternoon.
Others? Guess we could do a straw poll. Does that make sense to do that? We're kind of informal at this point in time. How many of us believe it would be good to really focus on the community engagement, 11311, and by doing that, it's not like tonight we know what that is. So obviously, we would have to put some work together and, board, retreat, whatever. There's, just the fact that we selected that doesn't mean that, oh, we did it. So don't, if it's kind of vague at this point, what we might do is, the only reason I'm saying that, it would mean that we would develop what we're gonna do. So how many board members feel that that would be an important goal for us, or important rule, I should say, for us to focus on and actually maybe ultimately create some goals around?
You too.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Okay. Is there another one? I mean, I think it's important, and Suzanne, you are always good to remind us that we shouldn't take on more than we can chew. Steve, are you okay if we focused on that?
Yeah, I mean, go by the will of the majority, and it seems to be pretty overwhelming, but, I hope that doesn't mean that we're not gonna do the student outcomes
No,
stuff.
no, no,
Because, that's,
no, no.
I think, to me, that has a higher priority than the
Yeah,
community engagement
yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, and for me, when I first looked at the list again, that was the one that just jumped out at me, as well as community engagement. And then I thought about, oh wow, we've made actually some really positive steps, because we now have the committee. And whereas in the community engagement, you know, we don't have the equivalent of that. I know we have our C&E committee, but I really do think what's in front of us right now, you know, I learned, and believe me, when I went to a shore meeting, it's like, no, folks do not have time to listen to the board meetings, and it's, you know, all this kind of thing. It's, yeah, so how do we do that, you know, effectively? But definitely we would not, and a goal very much could be, it's in our strategic plan, you know, so that has to be there. And as we are actually now then later focusing on what the superintendent goals, it could still be a goal. It's just, what do we need to do board work around to even develop and figure out something, an approach, and training, if that makes sense.
I also think, Steve, that there's a lot of work underway operationally to kickstart some of those academic improvement efforts, you know, many of, you know, which came along. And I think once we have a structure for that work to begin to populate up, so that we're all gonna learn about that together, it could even be that not next year, but the year after, that then there's a board role that's missing that will help bring that to yet the next level. So it could be that that operational work needs to sink in for a year, and that actually that goal on the board level is more valuable in the 26, 27 year, if that makes sense.
And I would hope that if we're gonna do, community engagement, that it is mindful of the fact that, there should be a lot of community engagement where a bulk of the students are, which is Middlebury. That there needs to be, we've heard multiple meetings in Ripton, multiple meetings in Shoreham, multiple meetings in Bridport, multiple meetings in Salisbury, and I have not heard anything yet about either Cornwall or Mary Hogan. And so, you know, like I said, I would want to be mindful of that. That if we're going to do this community engagement stuff, that we do it in an equitable way.
Right.
Steve, you would acknowledge those are engagements related to specific issues in those communities though, right? It wouldn't have made sense to talk to the Middlebury community about what was I hear you, but it wasn't like we were only going to those communities, or Wendy really wasn't just going to those communities to talk about the whole district. She was talking about really specific issues in those communities. If I'm hearing Wendy correctly, part of what we could be doing here is laying out a policy and like a foundational philosophy for how any engagement, whether it be district-wide, town-specific based on certain circumstances, is informed and constructed. So I think those are bad examples to invoke on an equity card, because those were engagements that were very intentional and specific around issues in those communities.
It does bring up a good point that there are others. For example, I'm thinking about the work that Rebecca Haslam was contracted to do, you know, and she met with historically marginalized members in every community, you know, families together to talk about what that looks like. And, you know, that's an example of work that I think needs to be built upon, and we need to think through, you know, so we tend to think of things in towns, you know, but also I think there are other layers that we could be viewing, you know, our community engagement around, and if we were to work together and think it through in ways that lead us forward.
Steve?
Jamie, you did
Oh,
have
I'm
a hand
sorry,
up earlier.
Jamie,
I don't know
I-
if you wanted to
Yes, thank you for that.
comment.
Go ahead, Jamie.
Go ahead. That was a while ago. Thank you. I'll think about it. Go ahead.
Sorry about that.
Sorry.
I guess, you know, being new at this and also not having a magic wand as to what the future looks like, but I have to think there is a good chance going forward there's going to be more opportunities for people outside of towns and just shifts in systems, and what was once big may be small, you know, and just kind of a realignment of things. And if that happens, I think it makes this type of work all the more valuable, so that whoever would like a seat at the table and a voice has that opportunity regardless of what location they're from, if it's a big location, small location. I just think the changes that may be coming down the pike just kind of add to the urgency to do some of this work and may make it relevant to spaces that it wasn't relevant to before.
Jamie.
No, I remember what I was going to say. The Community Engagement Committee, we just had our first meeting, and I'll say that, so we decided, I think, that next year we would start doing every other meeting out there. Did we say this already? Sort of out there.
No, yeah.
In the sort of like, remember we've been trying to figure out like, do the board meetings rotate? And then we're like, we've decided no for all the reasons. But the committee meeting, so we decided that, you know, maybe our committee meeting should rotate, which, you know, we thought was a good idea and an interesting way to sort of bridge that gap that we lost by having the rotating board meeting, without some of the same technical requirements and or difficulties, hopefully. And I guess as I'm saying this out loud, I would like to think of ways for policy meetings to be a little bit more engaging, not only internally but also you know, outwardly. It feels like the you know, staying apprised, this last goal, 1.13, 3.5, is all of our responsibility, but also it will require, you know, a closer look at what's going on statewide in Montpelier, and some of that, as people mentioned, the C30 stuff will, and so how can we make that work more community, I don't know what the right word is, engaged,
Maybe accessible.
accessible, or something, you know, and I don't know like what counts as community, like I know this is what we're talking about, you know, measurement, what counts, like if we call someone one day and we talk to them, and we talked to that one guy, I'm like trying to think over the last year what we did on that committee that really was legitimate community engagement, and it's tough to think of.
Sometimes it came to us, but that it was never initiated by us.
Yeah, we didn't, yeah, so I feel like we should, when I think about this goal, I guess it means thinking about ways to be more proactive in all the aspects of that, and that's, I guess, what I was reminded of.
Sorry, my battery just died, but it was down to 7%, and I'm like,
Well,
oh,
Tricia has a
yeah.
charger.
Yeah.
It's actually
Always.
true.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
Pete, sorry about that. Not that we need the slides, because you have them in your materials. So it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think really focusing on community engagement, and really then as a board putting some thought into.
I don't know which hookup your computer uses, but it's probably one of these three. There you go.
I'll
You should
try them
just,
all.
you should just be able to plug it in and go.
Thank you guys, sorry.
Okay,
The first try. And it'll take it a second probably to, because it was like, 1%. Okay, so, like for example, what do we need as a board to even begin to think about what community engagement is, right? Training wise, a consultant that works with us, and, I could envision, if we wanted to do that, having a summer retreat that's focused on community engagement and having someone that's very knowledgeable come and help lead us through that discussion, right? And it could be this year, you know, we're doing, you know, more learning and some experimenting, whatever, but we're making progress, right? It's not like we're gonna wave our magic wand and by the end of, you know, July, August, we're gonna have everything we need to know about community engagement. But it sounds like it would be a really good thing for us now to start focusing, for the executive committee to start focusing, working with Dr. Baker. You know, how could we do a next step here to really help us start to get our arms around, you know, what it is to move forward on this? Because I can't tell you that right now. Steve?
One thought I have is, I mean, community engagement can be so vast.
Yes.
In so many different ways, and I think if we have an idea of some of the spaces that we're going to need to engage with the community in the year or 2 years ahead, and sharing that information with someone and strategizing around that.
Yep.
I mean, I think that might be a space to start, because it just can be so broad.
Yes.
You can kind of get lost in it. And so if we have those specific examples, whether it's combined grades or facilities questions, like I think there's some scenarios that we could lay out and engage pretty actively with to try and focus on how do we engage this community. I know that doesn't totally speak to the inclusive process that would incorporate that community feedback, but I have to think with enough brain power, if we know the challenges, get some assistance of how to approach those, a process would hopefully emerge, is what I would think.
It might be important to come to agreement on what the purpose of community engagement is.
Yep.
I don't know the extent to which that's a conversation that the board has had. But that sometimes can really drive what you choose to do.
Does Laura have her hand up? I can't
Laura,
see her
I
icon
can't see you
anymore,
anymore.
so
Yeah.
I just wanna be cognizant if she's trying to raise her hand.
I am not.
Okay, great.
It's kind of hard when all you see is a slide and you don't see her anymore, so.
When you said that, is that a discussion you think it would be good for us to have now about what we think community engagement is, or is that?
No, it just might be an inquiry
retreat.
that as a board you may wanna undertake, and if you are pulling on training supports,
Yes.
that could be one of the things that you could ask for development around, you know, what are the different purposes, and how does a process follow the purpose, you know, and then you could almost engage in a classification exercise similar to, you know, kind of where Steve was going, I think, around, so these are the things that are coming up, these are the things that, you know, we normally think of as going under this purpose, you know, and this is how we do that. And now if we rethought about them from this purpose, you know, how would that change our approach? And is that wise, you know, so that we're being intentional about the approach for the things that are upcoming. You know, that, I mean, facilities, a capital improvement, you know, project is a classic example, right? The community engagement sometimes comes at the end when there's a chart, right, a concept and whatnot, and the purpose is to build momentum and support for something, as opposed to you know, coming at the beginning to ask for feedback around, you know, where people are, you know, with facilities and what's important, and that would be a whole different process, you know, and timing. And it might be nice to have somebody lead us through the various options for that and how we think about that.
And I also think along with that question is answering the question of, we say community. So what are all the pieces that make up
Of
our
the community.
community?
Yep.
Like, is it just parents? Is it parents plus students? Is it parents plus students plus grandparents? You know, what does that word community mean? So that we understand who we are really engaging with and why.
And that could change depending on what you're focused on.
It actually really, I think, aligns with your belonging goal. It's an exercise that you can be taking because, operating inclusively, engaging members in any community, if you are developing policy work around that, then that moves over to operations, right? So as we're bringing different folks forward, what does that look like? And what are processes that we need to think about if we're thinking about a different math curriculum or a different, whatever it is, are there community engagement steps that we need to take to make sure that we're doing the how in the way that aligns with the what that the board feels is important for the district to follow. So that might be useful.
So I think, kind of recapping what I think is important for us is to really think about how a board retreat could really be a way to kick this off and making sure that we have the right resources there to support us and help us to do that. And then out of that, we would then really come up with, well, this is how we're going to proceed, right? Once we've learned that information, and then decide, once we have a way to do it, what do we expect successful implementation to be, to look like, so that we can then evaluate it in the future, right? But we can't do that yet because we haven't done that first step. So it's kind of an onion, we have to start and, yep.
Yeah, I was just looking through our old minutes from
Yeah.
June on.
Yes.
To sort of revisit how we had done it in the
Yeah,
past.
thank you.
So we had met in June and talked about kind of the prioritizing which rules, and that's when we picked our top 5. And then we ended up kind of putting it aside for a little bit because we were anticipating the rubric to arrive.
Which
and
did.
it didn't. And then we ended up having our retreat with Judy Sclair-Stein in August, which is when we really focused on goals for the superintendent evaluation process. And shortly after that, that was when we kind of decided as an executive committee, it makes sense to really focus on the budget, and we had floated it to the full board on August 24th of last summer. And that's really when we kind of coalesced around that particular goal.
Thank you.
So that was kind of the process. It was a little clunky last time as well. So I think if we have, pretty good consensus that community engagement is the thing we want to focus on, I think maybe we can think about questions that we want to answer, think about a training, and we can kind of coalesce a little bit later. But I think you're right, Barb, that we need to learn a little bit more before we define what specifically we want out of this goal. But I think we're doing a good job, at least focusing and narrowing on that, because it took us several months to really nail it down last time around. I know we want to get goals for Dr. Baker soon, but
Plenty of goals.
Yeah.
We are okay.
Yeah. And what I'd like to also have this opportunity to, independent of the rules, right? Are there specific things that is board related that we need to do better? And we want to set a goal for doing that, right? That's why I included even in your board materials, I had the superintendent evaluation self-assessment of boards that I got the results on. There might be something there that it's like, I think we need to, and this is more board oriented as opposed to something that would be superintendent doing the work, But it's an opportunity for us to select a couple things where, I think we could do this better as a board. And I'm really happy to, have something like that. And a lot of that could be just that conscious effort of, we're gonna do this. Any thoughts on that folks have? It's part of that self-assessment we're supposed to be doing, right? And this was one that we had come up with. So, and this was done in, I think it was February or March. It was after we did the superintendent evaluation. So that was on the School Board Association website. So I thought, oh, this might be good, and I sent it out and asked people to fill it out. So there might be something there that it's like, the board utilizes group norms and has well-established chain of communications when issues arise. And that was kind of, it's on the bottom of that first page. It was kind of all over the place. So when I see something like that, is there something we could do, put focus around for us to do better? And put a goal associated with it? I don't know. Any thoughts?
I just think, go back to, last week I was listening to board chairs, and since we've spoken about the superintendent evaluation quite a bit tonight, we spent quite a bit of time Friday as people discussed how they evaluate their superintendents, and several board chairs all across the state were like, well, how do you get board members to understand the importance of evaluating their superintendent? And the answers were like quite interesting. Everything from a little bit of almost blackmail to to outright calling people out. They were like, no, we really have to have everyone on board on this because the superintendent is our one employee. And it's our one job is to make sure that the superintendent is doing the work that we've required and we requested of them. And that it's the only way that our one employee, as they kept saying, one employee, I was thinking, how many times you're gonna say the word one, really has an understanding and knowledge from everyone on the board that they report to, in a way, values and understands what they're doing. So, I mean, we've talked about that, yeah, we've done that, but I think that making sure that we all understand and realize how crucial our feedback to our employee is not only necessary, but it is a major part of our job. And yeah, it is something that I think we just need to make sure we do.
Yeah. What could be a goal around that?
100% responses.
Yeah.
That would be a goal.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what kind of come to my mind as well.
Yeah. I think that's a reasonable goal and a
Yeah.
reasonable expectation.
Yeah. Yeah. So I could definitely see that being a goal that we set for ourselves. Thank you.
I also think, it would be helpful if not tonight, at some point, we could have a conversation about indicators that, as board members, you would find meaningful. I think, Jason, I think you, when we were together in August, we were talking about, here are some goals that would start us off, as I begin to learn more about the district and kind of learn how to stabilize things and see where we are. I remember you saying, what would indicators of success be? And my experience as a superintendent is that it doesn't matter so much what my indicators of success are that I bring to that table as much as what are our common indicators of success, and I don't have a sense of what your indicators of success might be in probably some key areas. And so I think that would be helpful to me to know that, because you do represent, your communities, and I'm in the professional community all the time. So my sense of indicators of success probably draw from that, overly so. when really this is a position of public service, which is one of the reasons it means something to me to do, so doing that would be helpful to me.
And that was one of the reasons I included in here, another thing I stole from the School Board Association. It's nice having tools, is like SMART goals. It's not just having a statement, right? It's also basically being very specific, measurable, attainable, right? Results oriented and time bound, right? As we actually think about the indicators within that. So when I go back and look at the goals that we set last year, and if you go one more slide, I think I put those in there. No, I didn't, I put them in the email, sorry. You don't have to go, Matt, sorry. In the email, I had actually identified what the goals were we set for this past year. And they really didn't do that, right? They weren't measurable, they weren't, obviously and when you think about when we responded to your evaluation, sometimes you had to kind of think about, well, how do I respond? Because we hadn't set those, right? And it was real clear when we talked about the equity-based budget. Everybody could write books on that, right? Because we all knew a lot about it. So when we kind of hesitate in that evaluation, because, well, what did we expect? If we're doing that, it's hard for you to have known that, right? If we hadn't established that up front. So that's really important. So I'm trying to think the best use of the time. Would it make sense, because ultimately, okay, let's close out the kind of board goals. Suzanne had a suggestion around response and participation.
Oh.
No,
I was like, what did I?
no. I just want to have closure on that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, participation on the evaluation process, right? So I think that would be a really reasonable goal for us to include. Is there anything else that comes to mind? This is kind of like putting expectations on ourselves and holding ourselves accountable, basically, and goal setting. Is there anything else?
I mean, the one that just kind of jumps out, just looking at how you tallied the self-assessment results.
Yep.
I'm looking at the one, it's second from the last, on the second page. Board seeks ongoing learning opportunities to promote the most successful board-superintendent relationship. It seemed like a fair number of people kind of evaluated us as, just getting started, just, so maybe that's an area where we can create a goal. And I think, this is just my own observation, I think there's a lot of communication and effort on the superintendent's part, and I think this is where we can think about how we as a body can reciprocate that effort, or make sure that we are also clearly conveying our expectations or information that we need or what have you. So I don't know, I'm just kind of making the observation based on what was here, and I don't know if there's others.
So one example of this, it might be, so in January, February, we go through board presentations on the budget, and really getting the level of understanding that we can then really advocate for that budget. It's kind of pops to my head as well as a learning on our part, right? How do we go about that so that if we are at the grocery store and we're talking to somebody and they ask a question, we feel comfortable talking about it as a board. And to me, that's, kind of promotes a successful board superintendent relationship, because we're learning and take on that learning to be able to promote the district and, you know, and what the budget is, that kind of thing, as one example that came to my head. And I'm sure there's others. It's kind of a vague statement, right?
But your goals shouldn't be vague.
No, I don't. So that's why we would need to turn that into something that is very, I think, specific and measurable.
I think there's some fruit to be had in having conversations about, you know, what can be accomplished with an exceptional partnership, which I think is what this district is interested in, as opposed to, you know, a workable partnership, right, or something where, you know, it doesn't rise to anybody's list as a problem, but it, you know, it's fine. I think there are probably ways that we can work together where we're getting very measurable things done in ways where, you know, that just rise to a different level, you know, of organizational, I'm trying to think of the right phrase. It's not really improvement, functioning, you know, organizational functioning, right? Where governance and operations have that piece together. And, you know, I think this year has been a year of let's kind of get anew on the ground and stabilize where we are and begin to lift the things that need to be lifted from having a couple years where, you know, there's been in transition and we have, you know, the strategic plan was implemented and there are new folks that are coming on and so on and so forth, and all that's good, but I think there's something to be said for being able to talk about what are the fruits of that exemplary relationship, and are those fruits that we would like here, and if so, what does that mean in terms of how we go about those? You know, I think that would be good training for us to engage in, you know, in that way. And it's not something, some of you could share that experience from that you've had with other boards or, you know, or maybe even this board in the past, and I can share my experience, but that's different from having someone come and talk with us about that and facilitate that and help us to move to that next level, which I think, you know, will be helpful.
So what comes to mind, was it last year, the year before, when we actually centered our retreat, it was 2 years ago, around the governance core book. But we did just a very little of it, right? There might be some way to really take that deeper, right? Because it's a whole book, right? So it's easy to read it and kind of put it aside, right? And that could even be, you know, a facilitator taking us to a higher level than we were before, because it was all pretty new then. You know, because it's our level of doing good governance in many respects. And being able to take it further than we have. Because, you know, I think we've done good, right? We've definitely made progress, but how do we make it better, right?
Well, and don't get me wrong, I feel very supported in my work. I can bring you any problem I have and you'll give me all the good advice I need, and, you know, I mean, I definitely feel that in everything I do. It's really more, what's the best way, you know, how is it that we are able to level up so the organization can function at a level that's different, and maybe it's different from even lots of other organizations in that way. You know, what are key performance indicators that every organization looks at, and what would that mean here? You know, and what does that mean? You know, if I'm setting goals around those, how does that jive with your understanding of what schools do? you know, and how those need to, you know, be in place, for example. You know, that's an inquiry that we can look at together and then determine what's applicable in that.
And, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts. As far as key performance indicators, I have to imagine in educational settings, there's some amount of a list somewhere that you could go down and identify these 10 things are the key. And so that to me kind of fits in one bucket. As far as exemplary relationships, I think those exist when someone can trust someone else's decision making. And so, you know, I mean, I imagine each of us probably can think of people that we each know and we can not only trust them, but trust their decision making. And so that to me is kind of a marker of an exemplary relationship and functioning system. And so I don't, like, those are almost separate. One feels pretty stock and standard, the other is very high functioning. So I don't know, I'm trying to level both of those of like, how do we, you know, check the system, make sure everything is going according to plan, but then also have some space where there's this whole mountain of things that will not be anticipated. There isn't going to be a rule book for, and you are going to need to think on your feet to navigate those, and you know, those are both very important parts of the role in my mind, and it may need to be both of those get assessed, and maybe some of the decisions that are made individually, those are some of what's reflected on as part of an assessment. To look at that decision making, does it align with policies, why was the decision made in that way? So.
Thank you.
A question.
Yes.
So I'm thinking about what next.
Yes.
And kind of how to move forward from here.
Right.
I mean, I'm capturing
Which is good.
notes just like I would any other meeting.
I think next, what we need to get to a point where we, number one, have our specific goals with what is success in those goals, right? Those indicators, that kind of thing, more specific than what we've talked about, which we don't have to necessarily do 100% tonight. The other is, what goals are we going to collectively focus on to Dr. Baker, right, for her performance review? So there might be some themes we can talk about that we then need to take and make into a measurable goal, or a SMART goal, that kind of thing. And I don't know if you've had, I'm putting you on the spot, totally. You know, like if there's things that jump to your mind that, you know, I think for this year, you know, these are the kinds of things that I would want my goal, I think my goals should center around, and then we could kind of work on those to come up with, you know, what does that mean? Which I don't think we really did last year. We just came up with a goal statement.
Yeah, I mean, what happened was, just based on the minutes I was reviewing a little bit ago, we had our, really, it was the August 12th and 13th training with Judy Sklerstein that kind of made us come together as a board, really focus on the training around the superintendent evaluation and what makes a good one and what elements should be included and all that. And then the second day, Dr. Baker showed up with some goals, and obviously the goals were really tailored for kind of the unique year that last year was. It was not a complete year. She was still just getting familiar with our community, and so they weren't like really specific, typical goals, I think. And then I think it was maybe the next board meeting is when the executive committee presented to the board and said, we think we would recommend focusing on budget and making sure budget is aligned with our priorities. What do y'all think? And everybody agreed. That's kind of how it happened last year. I feel like we're not gonna be able to make goals tonight.
No, not at all.
Nor should we expect Dr. Baker to conjure up some goals on the fly. But I'm just thinking about, even for my notes, like what kind of timeline are we thinking of? Can we give us a due date? Do we want the executive committee to hammer out some ideas just based on notes and then talk about it next? I'm just wondering what
process
everybody
people would
feels
like.
comfortable with and what
Yeah.
kind of timeline we're looking at.
I mean, I have thoughts that I would like to, flesh out a little bit, so like in the next week or two, if we could, if it's, it doesn't have to be the executive committee, but if we could just have someone kind of take charge of that and coalesce notes and thoughts, and maybe take a first stab at it, that would be great, I think. But I think there's, I think our goal this year as a board, sounds like it's probably gonna focus on community engagement. I think there should definitely be pieces to the superintendent evaluation that are linked to that. But I think there should also be pieces related to student success,
Yep.
Superintendent goals. And I think we should be pretty
Yep.
specific about what we expect a year from now.
Yep.
For that.
I think you also have goals that relate to the strategic plan.
Yes. That's what I
You
was-
know, and sort of the specialized services, that's gonna be a big area of work, we've gotta do some, streamlining of those systems and ensuring that, what a specialized service means in our district is clear and, and our system in that area is all aligned, soup to nuts. And so, there's gonna be a whole new person that's gonna come on, that's gonna work with that. That's a big area of, supervision, in that way. There's a lot of community work, Ripton and Salisbury are coming together as a community. That's that one school, right, is gonna be going through a lot of change. There's a new principal there. There's a lot of, the work with Bridport and Shoreham will be ongoing, and thinking about what that looks like, support of the different committees, every committee that this board has is supported by the superintendent and or people the superintendent supervises, in that way. And so those committees roll into goals for those folks, which roll into supervisory work that happens in that way. So, we got negotiations that will be taking place for support staff, and so I think what's really important for me to understand is what will resonate with you that, our efforts are well spent, if you will. What's gonna feel really good in those areas, because there'll be a lot to do and accomplish. And just like on this list, some of it will get done no matter what. There's the unanticipated things, that come along as well. And I think, as I said, in response to Jason's indicator thought last year, like a lot of what a good superintendent and a good board, by the way, bring to the table is what doesn't happen. And that's, good luck quantifying that, so, but yet we can feel it, in that way, and that's important to be able to state. So I think it's important to all of us to deliver for the public in the way that we're asked to do. And so being clear about what that means, I think is really helpful. I'm not sure the board understands what it means to be a good board member. Like, how do you meet the expectations to be a good board member?
Right.
What does this board hold for board members is the expectation. I think that's something that could be clearer also, so.
Go ahead, Jess.
So thinking about Jason's comment about kind of like bringing together thoughts and notes, it kind of sounds like maybe after that would be training and education on our part to kind of answer even just the question of when we have so many competing priorities and this impending like question mark on a state and federal level, like how would a professional recommend a board move forward making goals for their superintendent that are meaningful? So, I mean, I don't quite know like the order of operations in other years, but it sounds like maybe that's end of June, July is like our education, whether that comes in the form of a retreat or working with a professional in a different area, but or just reading things. Yeah.
What do folks see as a timeline and kind of the role of the executive committee versus the board as a whole on how to move forward on like goal setting for the superintendent?
I mean, I
Steve?
think Jason's thought on kind of the next week or two, and I'm happy to be a part of this. I think it would be most productive if like I had some potential goals, sent those to the executive committee and they kind of got filtered out.
Okay.
I don't know that everyone would benefit from that, but for me being a new board member, it seems like that would be productive.
Yep.
I
Go
agree.
ahead.
It's always more helpful to start with something.
Yes,
than to
exactly.
create something from nothing. So, yeah, I mean, I like the idea of people shooting things to the executive committee to then have
Kind
it
of summarize and then bring back to the full board.
Yeah.
I do
Should
too.
we make an email that says executive committee?
I'm sorry? I didn't
Said,
hear.
should we make an email that says executive committee so that people can send it to everyone?
Yeah.
It's just the three of you, right?
Yeah, it's just three of us.
It's pretty easy.
Well, and Dr. Baker as well. but
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be awesome. If the next board meeting is the 12th. And unfortunately, this charger, it's not working on my machine for some reason. So, and we kind of, because today's the 28th, we have a little extra time in between, right? So,
May 5th would be the next executive.
yeah, the May 5th would be, so would folks be able to get to the three of us, your ideas around goals?
Yes.
Do we need to have some structure for them to send that information in, like topics, or just any guidance is needed, or just?
I don't know, I mean, I feel like any and all input is welcome, whether it's like an actual sample goal, or whether it's like, oh, I feel like we should have a goal related to X. I mean,
There's priorities,
Yeah.
there's goals, and then there are indicators of success, right? All of those things are important.
yeah,
If they're only priorities, then, then you guess about the goals and you guess about the indicators of
Right.
success, and, hopefully you get
Yeah.
close, right? So that said, it's hard to think in all three levels sometimes, depending upon who we are and what we do every day. So to the extent that there are those three things, I think that's helpful.
Thanks, that's useful.
Yep. Okay, so how about if folks provided their input to the three of us, by Saturday? Would that make sense? And then we would take those and then Monday, try to organize it and then bring it back to you and send it back out to you, and then we could schedule, a little bit of time on the 12th on the agenda as well to cover that.
So by Saturday the 3rd.
yeah, I think that would work.
Yeah, it sounds good to me. I'm happy to share my perspective. If none of the things I share make it through the filter process, I'll assume that's the executive committee's decision. That's fine with me. So-
And I don't think we'll filter as much as try to consolidate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, what we would bring back to the board would really be more a consolidated list, so everybody doesn't
Yeah.
have to work through zillions of things. There'll be
I think
themes,
the
right?
filtering would need to happen on the 12th.
Yeah,
So
I
the
think
idea
the
would be
filtering
just,
would happen on the
removing
12th.
redundancies.
Yeah,
stuff like
because
that.
it's really a board decision.
Yeah.
It's not an executive committee. We're just trying to do some work for to make the board meeting more efficient.
Yeah, and as long as the executive committee can get to a space where it can be more efficient, so it's not a list of
Yeah,
50
and that would be
bullet
the goal.
points and- yeah.
Yeah, hopefully.
There is some, the evaluation tool might provide some food for thought. There are those different areas, and then there are indicators in each of those areas, and so, it could be that in going through those areas, there are priorities that can be drawn from that, or there are some indicators in there that just give you food for thought for what you're thinking about.
You're talking about the superintendent evaluation?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
So-
thank you, Jason.
And
yes.
there's a link to that on the website by policies, if you go to the policies page, I'm
And I
pretty
can,
sure.
yeah, I can send an email out with a link to it,
Yeah.
so everybody has it. And maybe at the same time, if something comes up you think board specific, from a goal perspective, feel free to add those too. Something that, we wanna improve how we're doing something, like the couple examples we talked about. That would be great. Cool. It looks like we have a plan. I mean, we don't have to stay here until 8:45.
We don't?
Well, that's great. I will ask, when we do wrap up, if we could say a couple extra minutes. We've got cards for
Okay.
board members to sign for
And that won't
teacher
take 45
appreciation.
minutes
wonderful.
either.
It won't take long.
Yeah. Okay, so this is awesome, and I really thank everyone for their participation, and it made it really a good, I think, session. And we'll start to think about the communications as well, and, how we can get some resources that come together as, for a retreat.
Engagement.
Yeah, for the engagement. Okay, so anything else on this section before I move on off this agenda? Anything else that folks would like to? No? Okay, more to come. Next is our second public comment period. Is there anyone out there, Jason? No?
One attendee is not NCTV.
Okay. And next, we have board reflections. Anyone want to say any reflections? I'll start by thanking everyone for their participation. I think we did this quite well in a less structured way. It was good. And it appeared everyone had an opportunity to speak. If not, please speak up and say you did. So thank you, each of you, for making this a good evening.
That would be funny if someone was like, I didn't speak at all.
Yeah.
That was their only contribution. Right.
Thank you. Anything else?
I'll just echo that. I think you worked well as a slightly less formally and with less kind of bureaucratic kind of propositions, and so I think that's a good lesson for us, maybe, that we can have a discussion
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely.
fruitfully that way.
And so, and it's a tool that we have at our disposal. So obviously, there's certain things where we need the formality, right? When we're taking an official vote on something that, is really important. But, when we have discussions, and this, I wanted it to be more free-flowing, like it would be more so at a retreat, though it's a board meeting. We can always use this as a tool in the future, and anyone can suggest it. Okay?
I mean,
Steve?
I do think it's a sign of a successful board and board members that you can have a conversation, there's different ideas and, kind of work through it, so I think that's some measure of success.
Thank you. Well, can I have a motion to adjourn?
We need to do motion to adjourn.
I love you. I thought we had a second public comment.
I asked for that, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'll second.
In a second?
Yep.
Okay, so
Did you get that, Mary Heather?
it's, what time is it? Oh, it's 8
2
o'clock.
minutes late.
Yeah. I think this is a first.
We did start early.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
Still a
We
3-hour
started
meeting.
late too, yeah.
But also, don't go